Welcome back to our Question Pro Fireside Chats. We've got another great guest with us here today, Paul Griffiths, Director of Client Advocates here in the UK. And we're going to have a great conversation that I think is pretty timely. I mean, listen, we all know that we're in a bit of an economic downturn here. Everybody is trying to make sure that we're kind of keeping our budgets secure, that we're making sure that we justify our roles in the organization. And that's exactly what we're going to be talking about today with Paul when it comes to insights teams. How do insights teams really make sure that they achieve success in their organizations, make sure that they get all of their stakeholders bought in, they keep their budgets, they keep their resources, and they continue to make the biggest impact that they can within their brands. This is something that Paul has really been working on, has kind of made a core practice at Client Advocates, his consulting business, for the last few years. And he's got some amazing thoughts. I mean, thoughts that really apply in any economic climate, but I think are even more relevant today. So Paul, looking forward to getting into it. Thanks for joining us on the show today.
Oh, no. Thank you for having me. I'm always very happy to come along and chat. As you know, try to shut me up.
Absolutely. You know, Paul and I, we've run into each other a few times over the last year. It's always been an exciting conversation. I'm just always amazed at the level of insight that he has across the research industry in general. I mean, it just seems like he's got all the angles covered. So maybe let's start there, Paul. Just tell us a little bit about your background and you know, how you kind of aggregated this immense amount of insights when it comes to navigating the space.
Thank you. That's very kind of you to say that. So I've been knocking around in the world of insight for over 20 years. I joined a very big company that was called Taylor Nelson Softwares at the time. It's now it became TNS and then part of Kantar and etc. And I did 10 or 12 years at TNS and other market research agencies, and then about 10 years ago I set up Client Advocates, and I work with. I'm really lucky. I work with two different sets of people. So I work with research agencies and insight people, res tech platforms, people like Question Pro, and I help them with their growth and growth strategies and how to, sales, marketing, just how to be more successful. But then because of my background and my connections into end clients and enterprises, when I set the business up, I was approached by a number of them, people I'd used to work with when I was on agency side, to say, look, thank goodness you're not doing research anymore, because we know you're not very good at that. But we really like the way you engage with us, and we really like the way you helped us use the insight that you were selling in, and helped us to circulate that in the organization. And you seem to have kind of quite a good, slightly provocative view potentially around kind of what insight functions should do and how they should operate. So over the last 10 years, I'm really lucky. I sit in this nexus point, so I help agencies and I help end clients and their insight teams. And that hopefully gives me a good perspective on kind of how to help both parties.
Yeah. And I think, it's interesting because I think everybody is on the same page in terms of achieving that goal, right? Whether you're on the client side or the agency side, the goal is, hey, we're spending all this time, resources, energy, doing research, coming up with insights. Let's make sure that they're actually used, that they're actually getting to the right people, and that they're actually pushing the business forward, right? Whether you're agency or client side at the end of the day. And this is an interesting question, I think, in most periods, right? Like, our last fireside chat last week, we had Sean on, who was the chairman of the South Africa Market Research Association. And that organization's been around for 60 years. And I just can't imagine 60 years ago, if you're a researcher and you create a 30-page report, everybody's reading it. Right? There's nothing else to read 60 years ago. It's like, I don't have that many emails in my inbox. Probably get me like a nice report that sits on my desk. And I don't have a million Slack messages coming in. There were no emails back then. So, hey, I'm going to read that report. But we live in a much different time now, right? Like, everybody's competing for attention. So how do you think about this? I mean, how do you put insights and the insights function at the core of an organization? How do you make sure that resource and the work that they're doing is actually pushing the organization forward?
Sure. And I think my perspective on this is based on the fact that, you've already made the point, but I think it's worth restating. Insight agencies and insight teams should have an aligned agenda. It's about how to make insight more impactful into their businesses. Because if that's and more commercially impactful, if that's the case, and everybody wins, the organization wins because they've got more commercial insight. They understand their consumer or their customer or their passenger or whatever the sector is, their patient more. But it also helps the insight team, because the insight team is sitting there going, well, we've done a great job and we're getting stakeholders engaged with us, and they're coming to us and see that our relevance and see that we're making an impact. And that means that actually we've got more chance to fight for budgets. And agencies are sitting there going, well, this is great. I've got clients that appreciate and value what we do, and they're commissioning us and they're using us as partners to understand and to help them add their commercial value. So in that environment, everybody should win. The problem comes, I think, is that too often it's seen as adversarial, and it doesn't need to be adversarial. And honestly, I've been saying this for forever, but agencies end up with the clients they deserve, and clients end up with the agencies they deserve. And the best insight functions that I've worked with or had lucky to work with, either from an agency perspective or as client advocates, are actually the insight functions where they treat their agencies as an extension of the team. So they're engaging them, they're informing them, they are, obviously as an agency, you're never going to get all of the nuance and all of the depth and complexity of a big international organization and all the politics and all of the nuance. But the more that insight functions can bring their agencies in and use them as trusted partners, assuming that they've warranted that trusted status, then that's got to be a good thing for both parties. But too often it's like agencies just like, oh, we just need to sell it and get out quickly. And guess what? The relationships become transactional. The relationships become quite shallow. They become basically a consumable, or the client teams go, well, we're not sure about this agent. We're not sure about trusting them. We don't want to give away too much because maybe they'll try and sell us more, or they'll try and get more money from us. And therefore we're seen as being vulnerable. And so there's this sort of whole arm's length thing. And it's self-defeating, I think, for all parties.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that's somewhat natural when you integrate the commercial element into that, right? Is that, okay, well, we're an agency and we're trying to earn more money off of the client. And so, maybe we're not going to do the things that we maybe should be doing so we can increase fees. But obviously in the long term, that doesn't work. Is there a little bit of the same thing going on the other side? So when you think about like the insights team at the client organization and then their stakeholders or their board, are you also seeing a little bit of that like adversarial kind of commercially driven relationship, or at least on that side of the equation, do you see a little bit more alignment?
I don't think it's adversarial. I think what a lot of insight functions are guilty of doing is being too good a corporate citizen. And sometimes I get into trouble for saying this, but I'll say it anyway. So sometimes what happens is insight functions are not necessarily valued to the extent that they might like, or we might think as an industry they should be valued. And what happens is that when budgets squeeze, well, where should we? The insight function. What are they doing over there? What how can we? Maybe we can make some savings there. And my experience is most insight functions, or a lot of insight functions, they play the good corporate citizen. They go, yes, absolutely. We'll have our budgets cut a bit, and we'll kind of see if we can continue to do what we should be doing, but on less budget. And I've had several conversations over the years with heads of insight and insight functions where I go, actually, you know what? You need to push back on that. Don't just go, yes, all right, we're the insight team or the research team, we'll take the hit. Push back and go, no, actually, if you look at the things that we've done for this business over the last 12, 18, 24 months, and you look at the commercial impact that we've had, actually, maybe you shouldn't be cutting our budget. Maybe you shouldn't be immediately coming to us. Maybe there are other places you could go within the marketing comms ecosystem where wherever research is sitting. So actually, there might be other places to save money. And I think one of the things that strikes me again and again is that, and I work when I work with insight teams, I try and do this with them, is to try and get them to think a bit more like they're an agency. You know, agencies are having to justify their spend, their exposure, trying to demonstrate the value that they create all the time. That's kind of, because if you don't do it, you don't manage to build relationships, you don't manage to sell stuff. It's, you know, agencies are pretty good at that stuff. And what I keep saying to insight functions and heads of insight is actually maybe some of the tricks and tips that agencies use in terms of stakeholder management, communications, demonstrating value, reassuring a client that, you know, actually, yes, they're doing a good thing and that kind of, yes, this is the right choice. Maybe some of the techniques that agencies use, insight functions should also kind of employ with their own internal stakeholders.
Right. Right. So let's unpack on that. I want to talk about what some of those kind of tactics are, right? What are some of those things that the insights teams can be doing? But before we go there, I mean, I'm just curious, like, why is this a problem in the first place? I mean, if you think about it, you're a board at a large brand or company, you know, you're the head of marketing, you're the head of product. I mean, isn't it just completely logical that if we do some research before we go out and bring a new product to market or design a new package or come up with a new tagline or put out like, we will save money in the long run, because we're not going to waste a bunch of money and time going down the wrong route instead of just commissioning some research ahead of time and figuring out what the right direction is. Why is that not just a natural thing that boards and executives and leadership teams think about in the first place? Why have the insight teams lost value?
It's a great challenge, and I don't think it's the insight teams have lost value. I think it's that we as a group, as a collective, as an industry, aren't necessarily very good sometimes at expressing the value we add. And I think also we're not very good at promotion. And in fact, you know, self-promotion and it's kind of like, oh, I don't want to do, I don't want to be seen to be kind of doing that. One of the things that I've seen insight teams do very effectively, once they realize they can recognize they do it, is just do some pretty straightforward stakeholder management.
Yeah.
So go out to all the people in your organization that you think you could influence or you could add value to, and ask them what their business challenges are. What are the things that they need? And then go back to them with some ideas about, well, look, have you thought about using insight to do this? Have you thought about insight to do that? I mean, quite often functions outside the insight space, especially in the commercial space, if you're in sales or you're in product or some of these other things, you're probably not very aware of what's going on from a market research perspective. You certainly probably don't know the nuance of market research, and you probably don't appreciate all of the things and all the places it can add value. I mean, I'll never forget this. This is going back 20 something years. When I first joined TNS, I'd been on the client side. I started my career at Lloyd's of London, the insurance market, and I used to buy the occasional bit of market research or do the occasional bit of market research there using an agency. And I remember joining TNS. And it shows how bad my interview prep was, because I'd managed to get the job and managed to get myself in there, but didn't really know what market research was to a great extent. And I remember being taken through all the different products and all the different services that TNS could offer back in 20 something years ago, and go, oh my God, if I knew that I could have done this, I would have bought so much more of this stuff. And it wasn't because it was just, I wasn't aware of all of the capabilities and all of the opportunities that research can provide commercially. Now, that was because my research agencies and my clients back, my agencies back in the day, I probably had them pigeonholed, but also they weren't asking me the questions about, well, Paul, what are your issues and what can you do? What are your challenges and what do you need to do next? And maybe we can help you with some of that stuff. And I think insight functions too often sit there and go, we will be order takers. A client will come to us and say they've got this demand for a brand tracker, or they've got this demand for a new product, and we'll very happily do it. We'll go out to our agencies, or we'll DIY it, or we'll use whatever we're doing. But actually, they're not proactively going out and going, how can we help?
Right.
And it's because they're worried when they do, someone's going to go, who are you, and how much budget do you have, and why, so they're immediate sort of, oh, maybe if I put my head above the parapet too high, people are going to notice that I notice I'm here. Now, that said, there are some insight functions and some insight teams in that do this brilliantly well. So I'm in, throughout all this call, I'm sure anybody watching this is going to go, oh God, talk about gross generalizations, and of course I'm making gross generalizations because we're talking about massive, great, big, enormous multinationals and probably also quite small, niche, little enterprise businesses. But the point is that I don't think any insight function can under communicate the value it provides, even in the biggest and the best.
Yeah. And I think it almost feels like it's a little bit of like a personality thing going on here too, right? When you think about researchers, they're really, really good at listening, right? Understanding the markets, understanding what people have to say about things. That's what they're good at. Everybody else in the marketing department is really good at talking, right? Like, I've got these creative ideas. Let's go talk about this ad campaign. Let's go put this event out there. Oh my God, we can have this partnership, this influencer. And I just wonder if the market research and insights teams kind of get drowned out because they're really, really good listeners. And maybe that's like the talking piece, especially with that level of competition next to them in their group, right? The marketing team is always the loudest team, maybe aside from the sales team, but those are the people, right? That's your competition when it comes to who's in the room, what's the conversation. And now you almost have to do something uncomfortable. I'm used to listening, but now I have to interject, hey, before we go and do that wild idea, crazy campaign, maybe let's test it first. Did you know that we have the ability to test that? And we can actually come back to you with a relatively easy answer quickly.
Or even, actually, and this is the irony, because of course, you're right. As a generalization, people in insight tend to be far more comfortable at listening and reviewing and analyzing than they are necessarily at communicating and convincing. The irony, of course, is that quite often the best, most knowledgeable, the individual best place to comment is actually somebody from the insight function. And it's not even because they've got, it's because they've got actually this whole source asset of data that they've already got. I mean, one of the things I would definitely observe about market research and insight functions is quite often they don't lever the asset they've already got. And actually, if they were just to go in and look at their current data sources, and maybe partner with an agency if they need to, but there is quite often huge amounts of untapped data and insight within an organization. And what I've observed, and this again shows my age, is that as the business cycles get quicker and as teams and people's roles in organizations turn over quicker and quicker and quicker, very few organizations have what I call kind of a long-term memory. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm lucky enough to work with a few heads of insight and new insight teams who've been in place for a good while. And actually, there's you'll be having a conversation about something. A stakeholder will go, oh, we need to sort this out. And they'll be like, well, actually, just a sec. We've got some data. We did this piece of work 4 or 5 years ago. And the person from the stakeholder from the function goes, did we? I wasn't here then. So tell me what we know. And I think there is lots of opportunity for heads for insight functions just to go, actually, you know what? I have got lots of information. I have got lots of data. Before we actually commission any new work, let's go and look at what we've already got, because it might be we can sweat the data assets in a more effective way. Yeah,
I mean, it's interesting. We a couple episodes ago in the fireside chats, we were talking to Nick, who's our head of product for Insights Hub. And this is one of the newer products that we're releasing that tries to address this problem, right? That, hey, insights teams, we got 10 years of studies. Let's try to get them in one place, democratize this, and get it out there to the organization, right? Give people, all the stakeholders, a really easy way to come in and search and say, hey, here's what we got from a while ago. Now, one of the things that we're doing with that product, and I think, Nick and Vivek has got the vision here, and it's interesting to kind of see how insights teams react to it, right? Because we kind of force people to pull out the key findings, right? And actually write them down in a separate place that's not the PowerPoint deck, that's not the PDF report. Pull out those things and then start to create some stories. And now this is what people are going to search for, and that's where they're going to start. And that's the pushback that we always get. Well, why do we need to do that? We've already got the deck. We've already got the... And it's that notion that, hey, we got to shift the mindset as to what storytelling actually means for an insight function, right? That, hey, this isn't 60 years ago where you could pop a 50-page, report on someone's desk and they're going to read it because that's the only thing they've got on their desk at the moment. But we're in this different world. You've got to pull out the 140-character tweet and put that as the headline, right? Okay, here are the 5 tweets, the key findings that came from this report. So people can actually search and digest that a year from now, 2 years from now, when they're searching for that and they're continuing to get value out of that. Is that kind of the way that you see it in terms of like, how do we get insights folks, managers, directors, to get better at that communication, that storytelling piece? What are some of the tactics that you think about?
So I think some of it is just about trying to better understand how the insight is going to be used and how it's going to be consumed. I remember doing some work for a big enterprise a couple of years ago, and their team produced on a monthly basis reams and reams and reams of data reports, all in PowerPoint. And one of the things, they've done it for years, and they were very, very nervous about kind of cutting it or culling it or changing it because they were worried the organization would go, well, what are we doing? You're changing our data, and we know all the rest of it. So one of the things we did was we actually went out and talked to some of the key stakeholders, and what became apparent was nobody was really getting into the weeds on the they were looking at the high level numbers and they were looking at some of the top level stuff, but the data below it, which actually, when you said to them, look, well, do you know this report does this and it does this, and they were going, oh, not really sure. No one ever took me through that when I was onboarded or when I started, or I seem to start getting this report come into my inbox, but nobody's actually ever kind of come and sat down with me and talked about it in any great depth or detail, or actually even asked me what's useful. So just by doing that process, actually what we were able to determine, there was about a third of the stuff we could just stop doing because nobody was reading it, and actually it was kind of, so there was an efficiency gain there, but the efficiency gain could be repaid because the insight function was now able to go out to its key stakeholders and go, look, here's the monthly report, here are some of the headlines, here are some of the highlights, here are some of the the exec summary stuff that actually. And based on the fact that now, because I'm having these regular conversations with you, I understand more about what your goals and what you personally or as an organization are from a commercial perspective, so I can start to tweak and add more value. But it all comes from, in the end, understanding what your clients or your stakeholders' needs and requirements are. And too often, I think we are, as an agency or as an insight function, we're not terribly good at asking that and stuff, and getting under the skin of that stuff.
Right. No, absolutely. Wow. We're going to continue to dive in here and get into the tactics, but I do want to give people an opportunity to ask some questions. I know we've got 7 minutes left. Do pop in some questions if you've got kind of some thoughts or some ideas on how you're communicating within your organization. But I want to just dig a little bit deeper there. So, one thing, I think 2 things came to mind there. First off, how did you figure out what were the things that people weren't looking at? So you said you scrapped a third of the research. Like, how did you even figure that out? Which was the third that needed to go that people weren't reading?
Well, we literally took the report and sat down with the head of sales or whatever, and said, right, okay, so let's take you through the report. Which of these bits do you actually use? And did a kind of, it sounds bonkers, but we just literally went through page by page. And you went, no, not sure about that. Oh, didn't know it had that in it, really. Oh, that's quite interesting. Can you elevate? Can you make sure that's Can you make sure that goes up the food chain? I mean, this was not a. I'm not going to say who it was, but it's a very well-known brand with a massive research and insight team.
Wow.
And
Wow.
spending literally millions of pounds on data and insight every year. But
That's incredible.
the insight function was so technically good, and they were so passionate and so excited and so engaged with what they did and what they were producing. They were absolutely lived it. They absolutely lived it, and they lived all of the different changes in the metrics and the rest of it, but they weren't communicating it successfully into the organization to sell the value in.
I think this is something that like every insights team has to drop everything and go do this exercise, right? Like we're all really, really good at running focus groups. Do a focus group with your stakeholders. Sit them down in a room for an hour and be like, what of this research do you actually look at? I bet you one session will direct your entire strategy for the whole year.
Yeah. The danger is, and the reticence to that is that, and I've had conversations. People go, "What happens if they say they don't use any of it? What do I, what happens if I realize and they realize that actually all this stuff that I'm doing actually isn't adding the value, or and I understand the reticence and the worry about that. I think the way I've seen that work quite well to get around that is if you're feeling very confident and punchy, you go in and do the pure review. In fact, one of the things, the reason I was in the organization was because the senior stakeholders wanted me to do that rather than ask the insight function to do it, because they were worried the insight function would feel worried or upset or reticent about doing it. So, an objective third party coming in and doing that, I can kind of help with that. Yeah. But the another way of doing it is, rather than going to your internal stakeholder and going, do you use this report? It's to have a more open-ended conversation about, well, okay, what are your business objectives? I know as a strategy, as an organization, that we've got to do this in the next 6 months. We've got to deliver this growth. We've got to deliver this change in market, market share, whatever the big picture. But okay, for your perspective and your particular business, what are your challenges? What are your goals? What are the things that you need to do?
Right.
And actually get them to express that and ask. We're all market researchers. Hopefully, we're good at asking questions. Ask the questions of our stakeholders around, what do you need? What do you want? And then construct something which says, actually, what? I can't help you, and be upfront about that. But equally, actually, what? This bit over here, we've got some data already on that. Or did you know that we already do this, and you're getting it in your monthly report? And we obviously need to kind of take you through that. So you can have a broader, more strategic, a discovery meeting, which then helps that kind of process of actually identifying what is useful and what's not.
Right. I'm kind of laughing to myself when you tell this story, right? Because it's like, we're reticent to ask that question because somebody might say, no, none of this is valuable. But our job is to do that with customers, right? It's not like we would be like, oh no, let's just launch that product in that market without asking them, because maybe they're going to say they don't want the product. That's the whole point of asking them, right? And in the long term, if you're not providing value to your stakeholders, just like a customer is not going to buy your product, and you're going to see that revenue impact in the long run, it's going to be the same thing on your budgets as an insights team, right? If you're going and spending all this money and nobody's reading it, nobody's using it, you're not going to win in the long term, right? You might as well just ask, what are you actually using? What's useful for you? And if they say nothing, then the question is, well, how can we be more helpful, right? And I like the way that you kind of phrase that. Hey, don't just go ask them, is this valuable, is it not? But ask them about their kind of strategic objectives and kind of figure out where you can fit in. It's the same thing that you would do in a focus group or a qual study, right? Okay, hey, no, you wouldn't use that lotion. Well, why, right? How do you go about your beauty routine? How do you think about lotion in general and moisture? That's our exact approach. We're really good at that as researchers. We just got to do it internally.
Yeah. I think that's right. I think that's spot on.
I think the other thing is that you have this kind of natural human tendency on both the agency side and the client side where, hey, we're spending a lot of money doing this research, right? Okay, it's 50,000, pounds to go and get this piece of research done. So the report has to be at least 50 pages, right? Like there's this like mindset piece, right? Where it's like, okay,
Yeah.
so if we're spending that amount, like I can't deliver you a 2-page report. I can't deliver you
Yeah.
one slide, but guess what the key stakeholders want, right? What do they want in the boardroom? They don't want a 50-page report to go through in the boardroom. They want one slide that can answer the question that they can make decisions on. And that's what's worth 50K, not a 50-page
Yeah.
report that nobody is going to read.
Yeah. And look, and it's about understanding your customer, so or your stakeholder, your client. So if, when I work with agencies, one of the things we talk about a lot is the way you manage different stakeholders. So your insight function, they probably do want the 120-page deck with all the appendices and all the other bits and bobs in it. But but some of their stakeholders may only want, to your point, the one-page exec sum. And it's about making sure as an agency, when you're working with your insight partner, your client, that actually you are aware of that and helping your insight team do that most effectively. I mean, I've seen examples where agencies are sending through a finalized deck, and the head of insight or the insight function is then having to cut and paste bits of it to put into a short form report. And I'm kind of like, if we shouldn't get the insight function shouldn't be doing that. As an agency, we should be doing that with the insight
exactly.
team, because that helps them. And if we're helping them, then that means we're doing a great job. But also it means we've got a better understanding of the different stakeholder needs, which means the next time we work with this business, or the next time we do some research, we've got a better understanding of the end client and what they're trying to do. So again, it's a win-win. It's an absolute win-win. It's just a question of having the dedication and having the resilience and the focus to be able to kind of have, and the confidence, honestly, to go, look, you can have the 120-page, but what would be a really good 2 or 3 page summary report look like?
Exactly. And this is something that I think in the content marketing world, the internet has kind of forced everybody to think about this kind of like pyramid approach to content, right? Where you can't just throw a 50-page ebook at somebody and expect that they're going to come in and download it. You've got to start with the tweet or the LinkedIn post. They read that blurb, they get interested. That then leads them to a blog post that's a little bit longer. Okay, they actually read through that. They still want to keep going. Now you link them to the ebook, and then that ebook links them to a 60-minute webinar, and they can then continue to dig in. But if they just read the tweet, they might still get a bunch of value from you. The problem is that when you reverse it and you throw that 50-page ebook at them, then they haven't read anything. And that's just the day and age that we live in these days with the internet. And I think agencies have to think that way. Insights teams have to think that way. Okay, I've got my base report, but have I thought about the other layers of the pyramid, right? Okay, what's the 2-pager? What's the 1-pager? What's the one slide? And what's the tweet or the Slack message or the thing that's going to go up on my internal web that people are going to read as a paragraph in an email, right? And that's kind of the distribution strategy that we now have to think about, which probably we didn't have to think about as much, a decade or two ago in the insights world. But now the internet's way of consuming information has forced that.
You say that. I remember working with being on the agency side, working with a big tech customer, and this is going back 15, 16 years. And even back then, their requirement was if you work with us, you give us the deck, you give us the 50, 60-page deck, but we want 3 pages and we want 1 page, 1-page summary, 3 page. And for me as a researcher back then, that was quite, I remember the first time they said that to me and I was like, oh God, I'm not used to doing that. But actually it was a really, really, really strong, rigorous thing to do, because actually what it forced me and the team I worked with at the time to do was to really distill down into what is on 1 page, this all going to look like. And to your point earlier about the value, yes, was in the interviews we did and the data and the background and all the context and all that stuff. But actually the value was really in that kind of 1 or 2 pages where we said to a client, right, this is what we've understood, and this is therefore what you should be doing as a result.
I love it. Well, I think those are my two big takeaways, and hopefully everybody on this call can go and implement next week. I think number one, go have that focus group with your stakeholders, figure out what they're actually using from your research, what they need from you going forward. We're really good at that on the consumer side, but we're not necessarily good at that on the stakeholder side. So I think do that next week, right? I think that's a great point. And number two, I think as insights teams, as agencies, we should be thinking about the deliverables as a spread, right? So you've got your crosstabs and your full report at the bottom of the pyramid, but let's think about those further stages on the pyramid, right? What's the 2-pager? What's the 1 slide? What's our tweetable key findings that we can kind of talk about in a sentence or two? I think if we do those two things, we're going to put insights back at the core and keep on driving this industry forward.
I think so. I mean, to say, I think we are at the core. I mean, I feel very positive and very optimistic about the insight world, which maybe 5-10 years ago I didn't feel quite so positive about. I think we've got an amazing opportunity. Businesses are so data hungry and so insight hungry. The challenge is to make sure that we exploit that opportunity as an industry, whether that be agency or actually in the enterprise as an insight function. With so much we could do to add value, and it's just a question of making sure we're doing all the things that to make that happen.
Absolutely. Exciting times in the industry. Paul, thank you so much for joining us today and coming on the show. I know I learned a lot. I'm sure our viewers out there learned a lot too. Really appreciate it. For everybody out there, next week we'll have David Boyle on the show. That's going to be Thursday next week. So same time next week. He's the director of audience strategies, and we're going to be continuing to kind of dive into this topic on how to think about strategies around insights, audience, collecting market research. Again, Paul, thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
Oh, no, thank you for having me. It's been super. I've really enjoyed it.